Excellent. And yeah, as per usual, keep the questions and comments coming in via the chat. I'll be behind the scenes for today's session, monitoring that and feeding questions to our two specialist presenters. And we can see one of them on the screen there. We've got Jamie Robinson, who's the technical lead at Safe System Solutions. He's our technical lead. And I'm going to actually just chuck a few slides up to give an intro to what we're going to be talking about today. Let's go. Share that screen. Oh, now you'll be seeing something else, I think. Sorry, bear with me. I'm getting there, Jamie. Yeah, so Jamie's going to have a chat to you about a few different topics, but predominantly around, as I said, this isn't working for me, Jamie. So I'll let you. I'll let you get it started. You know, I've actually. Beautiful. There we go. Now we're cooking. Yeah, maybe if you jump back to there, and I'll do the intro slides. So we've got Jamie and we've got Tony Bull coming in later to talk about construction sites. But Jamie's going to talk about detailed design and touch on heavy vehicles. If you jump over to the next slide there, Jamie. Yeah, covering off a variety of things, difference between that standards review and a road safety audit, and the design vehicles and checking vehicles, and talking about those sort of terminology that you get with the detailed designs and detailed design road safety audits, common swept path issues and the like, site distance stuff, and some common road safety issues you might find in these detailed design road safety audits. And Tony is going to cover off the difference between a road safety audit and a compliance audit for a traffic management plan or a guidance scheme, and identify some common issues with construction sites. So that's what we're going to try and get through today. Jump over to the next slide, Jamie, and I'll introduce you. So there's a bit of Jamie's background, technical lead with us at Safe System Solutions, but started at Vic Roads with me actually back in the way back in the day, and held a variety of roles within Vic Roads, including quite a bit of time as the technical lead, traffic engineering and design, and did a lot of road safety auditing within Vic Roads, but also now does a lot of that auditing and design work and the like with us. And as I mentioned to you all yesterday and in our first module, the detailed design road safety audits are a very, that you can get a lot of information and a lot of technical detail. And it's really important, if you're not somebody who really immerses themselves in that end of technical road design, that your team does consist of people that are very familiar with that stuff, so you can understand it and you can predict issues. As I mentioned, if you're not at that technical end, it doesn't mean you can't contribute to these detailed design road safety audits. And that's why we like a team, because you will bring a different perspective to it. But certainly I encourage you to partner up with somebody like Jamie or somebody with lots of technical road design experience. So Jamie, I think that's probably about it from me. Before I let you sort of run through your slides, I'll pop back in a couple of times to talk about maybe ask some questions or put up some polls or the like, but I'll hand it over to you for now.
Thanks, Ken, and morning, everyone. Make sure you please keep the questions coming in as I go through. So today I'd like to talk to you about audits at the design stage, and with a bit of a focus on the involvement of heavy vehicles. There's a couple of reasons why heavy vehicles are so important. At the design stage, they're the largest vehicles that we're catering for, and therefore they dictate a lot of the design elements that feed into the designs that we're auditing. The other reason is that they are overrepresented in the crash problem, especially fatal and serious crashes. So heavy vehicles really are something we need to consider as part of the audit process. Now, a question that often comes up is, does a client want a standards review or a design review or a road safety audit? Now, there is certainly some overlap between the different processes, and probably more so at the detailed design stage end of the spectrum. But a standards review really is focused on compliance with standards. It doesn't have that safety focus. Complying with standards will lead to a safer outcome, but things can slip through. So a road safety audit really is focused on safety outcomes and achieving the safest possible outcome. It is possible that a design may be in accordance with standards, but may be unsafe. And on the other hand, you might have some departures from standards that may be a safe solution. So if you are picking up in an audit a departure from a standard, make sure you then go on to explain what the expected safety issue is. Any project brings together lots of different design elements. And for those design elements, there are often desirable values and minimum values. It's where we're combining lots of minimum standards that we often get ourselves into trouble and lead to safety, some adverse safety outcomes. So as an auditor, you really need to look beyond standards. It is important to have an understanding of the relevant standards, and the list is as long as your arm. When you're at the detailed design end, again, knowing your standards is more important. And as Ken mentioned, that sort of highlights the importance of having a team of different auditors with different skills and experience. So when you're undertaking a design stage RSA, you'll receive a set of designs. In addition to that, you may receive some other information, or you may want to request it from the client. And I encourage you all to seek as much information as you think you need or you want to understand the background to the project, the context of the project. And a couple of the things that you might want to know are the design vehicles and the speed environment, or the design speed. Those couple of things really do dictate a lot of the geometric elements of projects. So the design vehicle is the largest vehicle that you would expect to use the road or the intersection or whatever you're auditing on a regular basis. In a local environment, two local roads, it might be a service vehicle, which is something like a garbage truck or a removal truck. On a more major road or in a rural environment, it might be a large truck like a B double. Your speed environment, of course. Keep in mind that your posted speed isn't necessarily the same as the design speed. And the design speed, which is sometimes referred to as the operating speed, is really the important number that you need to keep in mind, not necessarily the posted speed limit. In rural environments, we often expect that vehicles will travel a little faster than the posted speed limit. Vehicle swept paths. As part of the design process, the amount of space that is taken up by these larger vehicles should be checked, and often swept paths are generated to demonstrate that. If they're not provided up front, you may want to request those from the client or the designer. And if they're not readily available, that's probably a bit of a red flag that the necessary checks haven't been done. You might want to seek some traffic data, and certainly in the last 12 months with COVID, you can go out on site, and the conditions that you're experiencing are certainly far from what might normally be the case in peak periods. So you may want some traffic data, pedestrian and cyclist volumes and information, the crash history of the site. Improvement projects are often driven by a crash history, and it can be useful to have the details of crashes that have happened in the past. I do know some auditors that don't like to see the crash history. And if you do have the crash history, it's important that you're not, you don't put the blinkers on and you're not sort of focused on only those crash types that have occurred in the past. there is a randomness to the type and the location of crashes that often occur. But if there is a trend at a site, it's certainly something you want to keep in mind when you're undertaking an audit. And it is often the case that an audit has been prompted by a crash history, and the client, if you don't comment on issues related to the crashes that have happened in the past, they may well request or query you on those aspects. So it can be a good thing to have that information. Any previous audit reports, you should ask the question if audits have been undertaken in the past, and if they have, look to see if findings that were raised previously have been addressed. So some common issues that you might pick up, and that I certainly have in my time as an auditor, might be that the choice of a design vehicle is not right, or that the design doesn't cater for the swept paths of that vehicle. You can get out on site and observe traffic movements. We are talking about design stage audits, but on the most part, design projects are improvements to existing roads rather than new greenfields projects. So you can get out there, observe the surrounding land use and the types of vehicles that are getting about, and think about the types of vehicles that need to be catered for. They might be something like this little service vehicle here, or the larger truck like a B-double. So why does it matter if we don't cater adequately for those vehicles? And always, as an auditor, keep in mind the consequence and look to explain that in your audit report, rather than simply say that there isn't enough space or the choice of vehicle is incorrect. So some potential issues might be that larger vehicles might encroach into areas they shouldn't, into adjacent traffic lanes or pedestrian areas. Opposing movements might overlap in terms of the amount of space that they require. Impacts with roadside furniture are a telltale sign that there isn't enough space for larger vehicles. Now, all of these issues listed here are about there not being enough space for larger vehicles. It can go the other way. If we design for too large a vehicle, if we have pavement areas that are too large, we can open up the possibility of high-speed left turn movements, for instance, by smaller vehicles. So we want to make our intersections, especially, as compact as possible, subject to the swept path requirements of the largest vehicles that we expect. So we've talked about design vehicles. They're the vehicles that are expected to use the intersection on a regular basis. We also use the term checking vehicle, and you may have heard that. That's a larger vehicle again that might come along once in a while. We need to ensure that the intersection can cater to that vehicle, but when the vehicle does come along, we don't necessarily expect that it would negotiate the intersection in the most desirable way. So a design vehicle might make its left and right turns from within the left and right turn lanes. A larger checking vehicle might need to turn from further across in the carriageway. So make a left turn from a through lane, for instance. And that's okay if it doesn't occur very frequently. It might be that big vehicle is under an escort, or there's traffic management in place. But catering to that checking vehicle might influence things like the placement of our roadside furniture. We might decide to pave behind curbs in certain areas that those vehicles might encroach. There are lots of guidelines around swept path requirements and turning vehicles. A couple of snips there from some Austroads guidelines. On the left, talking about concurrent right turns and providing clearances between those vehicles. If you look closely, you might see a minimum radius prescribed there. On the right, we have a swept path diagram for a truck. It looks like a semi-trailer at a particular radius. This one's a 20-metre radius, which equates to a turning speed in the order of 15 or 20 kilometres per hour. There is a series of these type of diagrams on the right for each of our design vehicle options with different radii and different speeds. These diagrams often have lots of different lines happening. You can see some red lines here and black lines. It is important to understand what those different lines represent. And I've got some examples coming up to show you. So here is a swept path diagram showing two concurrently right turning trucks. Lots of lines happening here. You can see one truck coming from the right with some purple lines and another with blue lines coming from the left, dashed lines, solid lines, all sorts of things happening. These diagrams are generated in software, CAD software, AutoTurn, or the like. And there are options to turn on and off lines that represent different things. You can plot lines that represent the wheel paths, the center line of the vehicle, the outermost part of the vehicle overhang. You can also plot an offset, an additional sort of offset, a parallel line on the outside of the vehicle swept path. And that's what's happened here. You can see two solid parallel lines on the outside of each vehicle swept path. The Austroads guides talk about providing a half-metre offset between the vehicle swept path and roadside furniture and the swept paths of opposing vehicles and different things. It does get a bit cluttered when you have too many lines showing. Really, the outermost part of the vehicle swept path is the most important to plot. Another of the lines here is this solid line. Hope you can see my mouse along the center line of the vehicle. You might notice that it's got lots of these little arrowheads along it. Each of those arrowheads represents pretty much a mouse click or a change in direction. So a requirement for the driver to turn the wheel. This one, the purple one in particular, is not how you would like to see a swept path drawn. It's not a realistic swept path. The desirable thing to see would be a single radius curve from this truck turning right. And the Austroads guides do spell out those minimum radii. So an unfamiliar driver wouldn't know that they would need to make the turn in this way in order to avoid the truck coming from the other way. So this example looks like a bit of back to front design. It's clearly a highly constrained location. It looks like an intersection has been designed within the available space, and then some swept paths have been put on in an attempt to make it look like it will work. And you can see here that conveniently the required offset between these opposing swept paths is achieved, or it looks like it is achieved. But had this vehicle swept path shown in purple been designed in a desirable way, you would see the vehicle continuing sort of quite a bit further into the intersection, and then a single radius curve. So there would have been quite an overlap between those swept paths. So a few things there to keep an eye out for. At the outer corners of the intersection there, you can see at the bottom left, we've got some conduits and pits, and that conduit is going through private property. That might be something that you pick up in a standards review rather than a road safety audit. It's certainly not a safety issue. A safety issue might be that there isn't enough space for a pedestrian footpath or for pedestrians to safely pass around the outside of the intersection within the space available. Here's another example of a swept path diagram that's drawn in a more desirable and transparent way. This was a design that we inherited, and it was claimed that it catered for the required vehicles, and some swept paths were provided along the lines of the ones that I showed you in the previous slide. When we put some swept paths on at the desirable radii, we found that the intersection didn't work by a long shot. You can see some notes here noting what the actual turning radius is, and this is a 12.5 metre radius, which is pretty much a minimum radius. The turns are drawn on a single radius as per Austroad's guidelines, and you can see that this left turn in blue encroaches this corner of the intersection in the pedestrian area by a fair amount, a couple of metres at least. So someone who wasn't familiar with this location and how tight it was, and who had been through any number of signalised intersections before this one and then encountered this one and expected that they could turn with some speed, and as they had done at the previous intersections, may well get into trouble. When we look at the turning movements on the other side of the intersection, we see that there is quite an overlap between vehicles that would be allowed to turn concurrently under the proposed signal phasing. You can see quite an overlap in the middle here between the green and the orange swept paths, which again have been drawn at this 12.5 metre minimum radius for that type of vehicle. So yeah, I guess the message here is you might receive swept path diagrams, but it is important to look closely, because it is something that can quite easily be fudged to make it look like things will operate better than they will. The safety issue or risk associated with this is, perhaps a little hard to quantify. You would hope that the drivers of those vehicles would anticipate the situation and not continue driving through at speed and into this collision situation. But there may be flow-on effects. If someone is surprised by the lack of space, they might encroach adjacent lanes. There might be these head-on or glancing type crashes and so on.
Jamie, so if you were doing a detailed design and you weren't given swept path diagrams, what would you do?
I would request them, and it's 50-50 whether you will be provided them at the detailed design stage. Often you are. If you are not, I would encourage you to request them, and if they can't be provided fairly readily, that's it's a red flag. Swept paths should be undertaken as an integral part of the design process, so they should be sitting on the shelf and easy to provide. And
I suppose a follow-up from that, so you mentioned that there can be some fudging of these, and what do you suggest if people are don't have that keen eye that could possibly look at one and say, oh, well, that looks a bit fudged, or that one, looks a bit dodgy? What do you suggest they might do in those circumstances?
Yeah, it would be important to have someone look at it that does have experience with these type of things, and that detailed design experience. There are a few of those simple things to look out for. Check that the turn paths have been constructed with a single radius. You can look at if the radii are noted, you can check those against the relevant guidelines, and there is an Austroad's turning template and swept path guideline that spells out all these requirements. Look for those arrowheads and changes in the alignment of the turn movement. Some of the sort of key things to look for.
Good. All right. Thank you. And to all the participants, please feel free to jot your questions into the chat as we go, and Jamie can cover them off.
Some telltale signs out on site that there isn't enough space for larger vehicles might be evidence of vehicles encroaching beyond curbs, as you can see here. This can lead to, curbs breaking, debris on the road. If there were pedestrians in that area, there'd be a potential conflict, impacts with roadside furniture, and so on. Here we can see some wheel paths tracking well beyond the curb and into a pedestrian area. This is down in the Port of Melbourne. It may be the case that there isn't enough space for the large trucks that get around down there. It's been suggested to me that there are excessive speeds at play here. Obviously, there's a lack of contrast or no real contrast between the island and the roadway here. It's all concrete, so it may be the case that it's difficult for drivers to recognise where the roadway ends. There is that potential conflict with pedestrians here if vehicles are encroaching pedestrian areas. The greater risk to pedestrians is probably on the other side of the road here. You would hope that a driver, and drivers are coming towards us in this instance, would see a pedestrian waiting here and not drive at them. It's more likely that a pedestrian waiting on the other side would be at risk of being struck by the rear of that truck. With longer articulated trucks, the rear of the vehicle tracks on the inside of the prime mover, and it can be difficult for a driver to understand where their rear axles will end up. And it's often the case that the rear of the vehicle encroaches curbs and pedestrian areas.
Jamie, I might just ask a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one is, you showed a couple of swept part diagrams where there's that overlap of vehicles as they're going in. If the volumes of that vehicle type were very low, would you still raise it as an issue in the audit report?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you may have identified the issue that there is that potential conflict. When assessing the risk of that issue, you need to obviously think about the types of vehicles that are using that intersection and what the likelihood is that those two large vehicles will come into conflict at the same time. So if your volumes are particularly low, you might consider that risk very low or even negligible.
Okay. Is it something, even if you thought it was negligible, that you might just note in the audit report, just so they're aware of it?
Yeah, I definitely would. It's poor design practice. If we've determined that is the vehicle that we need to design for, we should be designing for that vehicle in a desirable way. It also future-proofs the intersection if there was to be new development or land use nearby that might generate more of that type of vehicle.
Yep.
Yeah, so I would certainly note it, and then in your finding and your assessment of risk, you might talk about the number of those vehicles and the likelihood of that crash occurring being low, perhaps.
Okay. Next question's about curb damage at roundabouts, and Nero is saying there's a bit of that out there. What are your suggestions that might improve the situation with that? And Nero's particularly concerned with the risk it might pose for pedestrians around those areas.
Yeah, that could be a result of a number of things. It could be that the design perhaps wasn't ideal in terms of space required for vehicles negotiating the roundabout, but it's probably more likely an issue with excessive approach speeds. People sort of trying to get through a bit too quickly. So measures to reduce speeds approaching and through the roundabout would be something to look at, I would say. And there is that risk to pedestrians associated with that. So if you can, perhaps use some pavement markings to encourage lower speeds, signing, these are sort of some band-aid treatments. Probably you might look at, providing some LATM devices and some road humps or something like that on approaches to encourage lower speeds.
Good. Thanks, Jamie, and thank you for those who are putting in questions. Please keep them coming in.
There's another telltale sign that there might not be enough space for a turning vehicle. Signs being knocked down, and you do often see this on splitter islands. It might be a keep left sign at a splitter island where a large truck has turned to or from a side road and encroached the island. Another common issue that you might encounter is a lack of sight distance. Now, there are lots of different sight distance requirements for roads, but the basic intention is to provide enough time and space for motorists to observe other road users and the road features, and provide them with enough time and distance to take evasive action or come to a stop before they enter that collision situation. So sight distance can be provided between vehicles, between motorists and vehicles, between motorists and other road users, to the pavement. So we talk about, and I think we've got a slide coming up sort of detailing some of the different sight distances, and they're all described in the Austroads Guidelines parts 3 and 4. Sightlines can be restricted by various things in the roadside. It might be the road alignment. If we have a horizontal curve with trees or other objects on the inside of the curve, we might have a lack of sight distance. Crests in curves can restrict our sight distance. There might be other temporary obstructions of sight distance, like parked vehicles. There might be other things, road furniture, trees and poles, which commonly impede sight distance at intersections. Vehicle stand-up angles, that refers to the angle at which a vehicle approaches an intersection from a side road. And the desirable thing is to have vehicles approach at a 90-degree angle or as close as possible to that, so that it's easy for the motorist to view traffic coming from either direction rather than having to look back over their shoulder. Y intersections have poor stand-up angles and poor crash rates. One of the types of sight distance that we need to think about is SISD, and perhaps we can give a prize to someone who can tell us what SISD stands for.
Okay, first person to type in what SISD stands for, and then we've got a question which Alex has popped in on both the chat and the Q&A, which is nice. Okay, and it is Mark. Safe intersection sight distance, and gee, they all came in at once, so it was very quick there. So yes, safe intersection sight distance.
Very good. Safe intersection sight distance provides enough time and space for the vehicle here, travelling on the major road, to see a vehicle on the minor road enter the conflict area and perhaps stall or come to a stop. It gives this guy enough distance to see that happen, put on the brakes and come to a stop before reaching this conflict point. You can see that roadside objects within the road reserve, or perhaps within private property, can obstruct SISD. We also need to think vertically If there's a crest, it might reduce SISD to below, or the available sight distance to below the required level. Now, SISD, it can be difficult to achieve. So we're talking distances something like 250 meters plus in high-speed environments, 100 kilometer per hour environments. Another thing I'd like to point out here is this snip is from the Austroads guide, and it talks about where SISD is measured from, and it sort of nominates this position of the motorist on the side road. The VicRoads supplement to the Austroads guide says something a little bit different. So it is important to always look to your supplement. Are we all Victorian? Is this a Victorian audience? We
got a few others from different jurisdictions and different countries, actually.
Wherever you're from, it's important to look to your local supplement, which does take precedence over the Austroads guide. So always look to that in case there is a local practice that you should be referring to or applying.
Now, Jamie, there was a question that came in. It was back related to swept path diagrams, but I'll just jump in now before it disappears. So the question's, if site conditions do not allow for the full coverage of the swept path, so something like property boundaries or the like, how is that captured in the audit report?
The issue is the issue. As an auditor, we're looking at things purely from a safety point of view, and there are often things that we can see reasons why things have been designed in a certain way. But if the issue is there, we should report on it. We then need to think about, what's the likelihood of that occurring, and if it happens, how severe is the outcome, and these type of things. There often are good reasons why things haven't been done in the most desirable way, but I would not let that stop you or influence you from reporting on an issue.
Absolutely agree there, Jamie, and it's important that because you can often very much see why something has happened, and you're sympathetic to the poor designer in these situations. But the fact is, if it's a safety issue, it's a safety issue, and they may need to think broadly about how they can lessen the risk there with that issue. So you can also be quite helpful in your recommendations on that. And you can even be slightly sympathetic in your reporting of the audit. You can say it is acknowledged that there's, land constraints here and the like. However, this presents the potential for whatever crash you are concerned about. Thanks, Jamie.
This image shows a location where we had a wide 2-lane road that in peak conditions functioned as a 4-lane road. It was decided to formalise parking. And you can see the yellow lines there indicating a marked parking lane. So that was implemented. The dimensions here indicate that solid line was to stop 10 metres prior to the intersection as per guidelines. And you can see at the top there a little cross section showing a 2.5 metre parking lane. So this was implemented. And there it is. You can see that entering from that side road, those parked vehicles do significantly impede sight lines, and certainly well below SISD levels. A fraction of a second later there, the murk is upon us, and a safety issue immediately presented here. A question that's often raised is, do we consider parked vehicles as in our sight distance checks? And I'd suggest that you should. The guidance is probably a little vague on that, but and that's sort of on the basis that we can't assume that vehicles are parked there all of the time, I suppose. But in this case, the parked vehicles are the reason why sight distance is not available or is very poor, and an issue of side intersection side impact crashes immediately presented. Perhaps the attendees can offer some suggestions on how this might be now addressed.
Okay, so pop into the chat any ideas you have, maybe recommendations you might make as an auditor to lessen the risk of this this issue or this crash. So we'll give you a second to jot anything down.
You can imagine that if this vehicle at the front here was a van or something like that, the situation would be worse again.
Okay, so we've got a couple of things coming in now. So we've got the idea to restrict the car parking by a few bays to open up those sight lines. So moving the give way forward in order to open up sight lines. Lots of people wanting to restrict the parking.
That would certainly help if we could get rid of, even one or two parking spaces would open up sight lines significantly. I like moving forward the holding line, and if you were to do that, you might want to construct a curb out stand here to shelter those vehicles on the side road. So that's probably your sort of Rolls-Royce treatment would be to construct that outstand. You'd be losing a little bit of parking, and you'd be bringing forward traffic on the side road and giving them a much better view to approaching vehicles.
And we did have one more that came in on a different sort of tack. There is a raised intersection.
I like it. That would certainly reduce both the likelihood and the severity of any crashes there by reducing speeds. That's a road with quite an important traffic function, so it's perhaps not a location where you typically find a raised intersection, but it would address that problem, certainly. Yeah.
And a bit more support there for curb out stands, extending the curb at the intersection. There was a comment in there about the utilisation of a stop sign, and I think that's probably a good one for you to talk to, Jamie, because that's often a thing that comes up around these intersections, but also other intersections out there where people want to replace the give way with a stop to improve safety. What are your comments on that?
It is a common thing to do where you do have issues with people failing to give way from a side road, is to simply replace the sign and the hold line with a stop condition. It does encourage motorists to be a bit more alert to the situation. So look, it can help, but it really is a bit of a band-aid fix. There are criteria around sight distance requirements for stop signs in the Australian standards, and you do often find that stop signs are implemented where good sight distance is available, so they can quickly lose credibility, and you don't see people obeying them. So look, it is something you might consider, but it's very much a band-aid fix, and you want to think about the available sight distance and the credibility it'll have with drivers.
Good, thank you. And I'm just going to mention something because it's coming in, lots of great comments coming in. Thank you, everybody. There's ideas of potentially looking at roundabouts and bigger picture changes at this intersection, which I think is a good one. Then there was a question that's come in about which of these treatments that we've been talking about would be categorised into that primary safe system treatment and which would be categorized into the supporting treatments. And so do you want that, or do you want me to do that one?
I'll have a crack and then you can go. Look, most of them are supporting treatments. So supporting treatments are ones that reduce the likelihood of something happening, but when it does happen, it'll be to the same severity. So, opening up sight lines is very much supporting treatment. Raising the intersection might be considered a primary treatment if it was designed to reduce speeds to a point where we wouldn't expect to see serious crash outcomes. Providing a roundabout would be a primary treatment because it does reduce speeds and impact angles to tolerable levels. So within an audit and making recommendations, we should write our recommendations in a way that we're not sort of singling out just one possible fix. Leave the options open in case the client can't implement the one option that you might think is the best. And within your recommendations, try and look for that primary treatment that is the best outcome in terms of meeting safe system principles. So you might have a series of recommendations or options that might include a primary treatment and then some other, if that can't be achieved, some other supporting treatments that they might fall back on.
Good. And I think you've described that really well, Jamie. And it's thinking about sort of physical measures to reduce speed within those tolerable limits is really generally what we're categorizing as those primary treatments. Now, at the end of today's session, you're going to have a couple of things to do. You're going to have your usual quiz, and then you're going to have another sort of more elaborate quiz assignment in Moodle where you're going to get some practice about finding issues in designs, also then risk rating and categorizing into primary or supporting treatment. So you will get some more practice and there's more pointing of stuff in terms of information for you. It's a little bit challenging, but a good way to remember that, I think, is things like signs, line marking, traffic signals, anything that's just addressing the likelihood of a crash, probably going to sit in that supporting treatment camp.
I might just make a comment on that. I often see audit reports and they might pick up an issue and say something like, a sign's been knocked down, reinstate the sign. And the recommendation to reinstate the sign is classified as a primary treatment because it's entirely addressing the issue that's been identified. But, the sign being there in itself is not a primary treatment. So, a sign will, alert motorists to a situation and reduce the likelihood of a conflict perhaps, but it's certainly not a primary treatment. So that P category in recommendation should be reserved for treatments that actually are primary safe system treatments. They reduce speeds or impact angles to tolerable levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the really common misunderstanding from people entering into doing road safety auditing is to think that primary means that it's their number one recommendation, but it's actually not that. The terminology is a little bit confusing from that sense. You've got to think about the crash and is it being addressed to the levels we want. Lots of more comments coming in on this, Jamie, and we're probably going to have to move on shortly, but I'll quickly rapid fire them at you. A couple of people talking about speed, traffic calming on the main road, on the approach here, so be that speed cushions or humps or the like on the approach. I suppose a little bit like the raised intersection there, isn't it? It's a good idea. You've got to take into the context the whole use of that road and the road use hierarchy and things.
Yeah, no, I like that.
The next one's about risk rating something like this. How and the question's really, how would you risk rate it in the report? But what you don't need to necessarily give us your specific risk rating, but how would you go about thinking about what the risks would be?
Yeah, so the risk rating comes down to your likelihood and your severity of the crash that you're predicting may occur. So the severity is largely dependent on the speeds that you would find there. So here we're talking about a potential side impact crash. Side impact crashes, we know that we can have some serious outcomes at sort of relatively low speeds, perhaps 50 kilometres per hour. So I would suggest here, our sort of worst case would be that serious side impact crash. So we're looking at a serious outcome, but it's probably not particularly likely. The likelihood component, is probably more subjective and depends on your observations out on site as to how dangerous you think the situation is and how likely it is that crash type will occur, and that will depend on traffic volumes and other sort of site-specific considerations.
Yeah. And for me, I often work backwards at this point, and I say, well, okay, if this stays as is for the next 5 years, how many serious injuries am I expecting at this location because of that sight distance challenge? And it helps to calibrate my risk rating, especially if you've got a good understanding of where injuries, serious injuries and fatalities are occurring and what frequency they are around the road network. Thanks, Jamie. And you better keep ticking along, because I see Tony Bulls slipped into the room, and he's chomping at the bit to talk about construction site safety. G'day, Tony.
G'day, Ken, Jamie, everybody else, how you going?
Good.
Jamie's got a few more slides to go, Tony, so we'll let him keep doing that, and we'll get back to you.
All good, thanks.
Home stretch now. So we've talked about SISD. There are a lot of sight distance requirements that apply to roads. Some of them are mandatory requirements, others are more nice to haves. Stopping sight distance and approach sight distance, you may have heard of those. They are must haves that provide enough distance for drivers to perceive the road environment ahead of them. Stopping sight distance and SSD and ASD are numerically the same. SSD is required at any point on a road, and it's to allow drivers to see an object on the road. So it's the height that we're measuring to is different. We're measuring to an object that's assumed to be 0.2 metres high, whereas for ASD, we're thinking about drivers seeing pavement markings, and we're measuring to the pavement level. Entering sight distance, manoeuvre sight distance, nice to haves, and they apply at intersections. On sort of more remote environments, we see different issues present. They often relate to things like delineation and road surface, especially where we're dealing with unsealed pavements. In this particular environment, you can see that there is no delineation of the roadway. It's a very straight road, but if and when we do encounter a curve, it would be important that it's well delineated. We do see speeds on these type of roads as high or very nearly as high as on sealed pavements, and they are overrepresented in crash numbers when we're thinking about numbers of vehicles that use these roads. So there's a list of common issues that you might find at intersections. We've discussed a few of these. All of these things are mentioned in the checklists at the back of AGRS Part 6A. So especially for those that are new to auditing, I encourage you to have a copy of the relevant checklist in your back pocket when you're undertaking an audit, to make sure that you're thinking about all of these things when you're doing an audit. And there is a checklist for each of the stages of audit. If there are any questions on any of those, I'm happy to take them. But being conscious of time, I sort of won't go into any of those in any detail. when we're talking about mid-block locations, we're thinking about different things. So at intersections, it's more about conflicts between vehicles, swept path issues, ensuring that the intersection form and layout is well delineated, and that motorists have got all the cues that they need to understand the intersection. At mid-block, we're thinking more about the road cross-section, providing enough space for all the road users that that need to use that road. There might be space for cyclists, pedestrians, and so on. Do we have roadside hazards that need shielding? Are there drop-offs, and so on? Is our alignment vertically and horizontally as good as it could be? Are we avoiding potentially misleading things like combining horizontal and vertical curves? All of these type of things. And again, a lot of these things are listed in the checklists. So happy to take any questions on anything I've covered, or if there are any dot points in those lists there that sort of resonate with people.
All right, a question has come in around the previous situation with the sight lines out of the side road, and well, the question goes along the lines of it appears standards have not been met in that one, and well, I'm not 100% sure on that, but anyway, let's assume that standards have not been met, and it was an agreed departure from standards by the designer or the project manager and the like. How do you address that in a report?
Well, look, again, it's as an auditor, it's sort of that's not really your concern. If you identify that there's an issue, you sort of report independently on that issue. Yeah, look, it is often the case that there are sort of agreed departures from standards, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, there are, at any particular location, there are lots of different standards or elements that need to come together, and it's often okay to depart from one standard as long as everything else is happening in a desirable way. So it's often okay that we do depart from one particular standard, but I suppose that's a response to the audit from a client that, you know, we thought about it and we've, you know, sort of consulted with the designer and we've decided, all things considered, that we can depart from the standard here. But as an auditor, that's not something that you would need to concern yourself with.
Yeah, and it's really one of these things where, as an auditor, you need to get yourself in the space that you're the auditor now, not the project manager, not the designer. Now, because that's up to them to choose. You know, if they've departed from standards or they've compromised here or there or the like. You're simply, all we're doing in an audit is reporting those things that we believe could cause death or serious injury to people in the future. And it can be very sometimes frustrating for project managers and designers where they explain to the auditor, and they say, we're doing a design exception report. We've all agreed to this. We know it doesn't meet standards and guidelines, but here it is, and it's been signed off by our chief engineer or whatever it is. And then you go out, you audit, you look at it, you think it's an issue, you report it back, and they say, well, we just talked about that. You say, well, I still believe it's an issue. So you've put it in there. Anyway, that's that's a bit of an explanation there. So we've got, Jamie, a question here, which is going to be right up your alley, and I'm going to have to time limit you on how long you talk about this one. But what are some typical road safety barrier issues that we need to look out for when we're auditing?
Yeah, I've actually just completed a post-construction barriers audit yesterday. But at the design stage, barrier offset relative to the traffic lane is a key consideration at the design stage, providing enough space for vehicles to pull over if they need to. Choice of product, using the most flexible product that you can, subject to the constraints of your site. ensuring that the products that you use in the terminals, especially the terminals of barriers, are the most hazardous part. They're all crash tested and accepted for use, but we need to design barriers such that the terminals are located where they're not likely to be hit. Flare them away from the road if we can, and these type of things. We need to be aware of minimum length requirements for barriers, barrier deflection requirements, and that might influence your choice of barrier. Ensuring that there is enough space for the deflection of the system. So catering for deflection versus the amount of space between the barrier and the road is a bit of a trade-off, and achieving the best balance there is one of the key things in barrier design.
Yeah, good. A few there, and there's plenty of others. One that I suppose often look at is whether the barrier itself blocks sight lines out of driveways or intersections, as that sight distance has it itself, and many more. And in fact, there's so much associated with barriers. We have a 3-day course on barriers, which some of the participants have actually done, but a lot to do with it. That's probably another one where a great example of, if you were asked to do a road safety audit of a barrier job, you really want to get somebody who has barrier expertise in as part of the audit team with you. Now, you'll provide some great value if you're not a barrier expert, but you really want to pull somebody in with a lot of that knowledge, because there's a huge amount to that. Sort of, you've got to know, how do you calculate the length and need for the barrier? What are the different products and how are they going to perform, the end terminals and the differences with that, and different configurations. So there's a huge amount to cover there. But good question. All right, Jamie, any more slides from you, or is that your last one?
No, I'm done.
Okay, well, I am going to take people through the checklist later on after we hear from Tony. So there's a little bit more. Jamie's last couple of slides there were the sort of things that are presented in the checklist to be able to help you and guide you in your thinking as an auditor and make sure you're covering off lots of stuff. But Jamie, thank you very much for your time. If people did have follow-up questions for Jamie or want to get in contact with him, his contact details are in your notes. And of course, you can contact him through myself or Kathy as well. Thanks, Jamie. And I'll talk to you later on. And
thanks, everyone. Cheerio.
Thanks. Okay, so next we have Tony Bull, who I briefly mentioned, but I'll introduce Tony a little bit more. Tony has been around passionately advocating for good practice, best practice, road safety around construction sites and roadworks, traffic management schemes and the like. And he's been doing that for quite a number of years. And Tony's worked internationally on this stuff and sits on lots of different national committees and the like. And Tony is currently working with the Department of Transport. I'll let him tell a little bit more about what he does. But I've asked Tony to come in and present this short presentation because it's really the field he is immersed in every minute of every day. But we also said, Tony, we know you've got a lot more than than this, and we're not doing you justice with the short amount of time we've made available. And so Tony's kindly put together a longer presentation and recorded that, which will be available in Moodle for you to watch in your own time as you want. And there's some supplementary notes and guides that are in there. So there's a huge amount of information there. Tony's going to give you a short overview and point out a few things just to switch a few lights on in your mind. So welcome, Tony, and thank you again. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Ken.
And we can see the slides perfectly.
Got the slides, excellent. Welcome everybody, and I suppose, Ken, what numbers and where's everybody located?
Yes, good question. So we're mainly Victorians, but we do have some other jurisdictions. We've got South Australian, Tasmanian, Queensland, and we have some internationals. We've got Sweden and Brazil.
Excellent. Great cross section. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining Ken and his team in this presentation. As Ken said, that I've sort of been around for come on forward for me. There we go. Been 38 years now. I've worked with I need to update that slide. 38 years. I clocked over in January. So with the Department of Transport, Vic Roads, and a lot of that time has been in the maintenance area. My current role is, or title is, Program Manager Maintenance with Regional Roads Victoria. I've had many different roles in the maintenance area, in the construction area. So, and all along, worksite safety, traffic management has been a part of that role. I've been fortunate enough to have a couple of stints overseas, working in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Dubai, putting manuals together for safety at work, road works. I've done this road safety audit training for a fair few years now. I think be close to 20, and training in traffic controllers and traffic management implementation. So that's me, and as you see, that working in different parts of the world, there's different levels of understanding, different levels of signing available for what to try and keep the site safe. And it was very interesting work looking at those different countries and trying to I think the great part about it was that Australia was recognised at a leading country, and even down at the level that Victoria had good practices as well. So I think that was a testament to the work that we currently do in Australia and the standards we set. It's interesting that you look at, and Jamie and Ken will have mentioned, this is an independent set of eyes looking at a situation. This is the car park in Warrnambool. They've just got some dots for where people should park for the customer service area. You look at the dots and you think, well, is it 90-degree parking or is it 45-degree parking? It's a very, I suppose, a simplistic way of looking at something, but it's people's perception on how you should park. And this is what a road safety audit can do, is you look at those conflicts, those issues, those non-compliance items, and we should reinforce that a road safety audit, especially in the construction sites, is not a compliance audit. It's a road safety audit. So you're looking at those safety issues that could potentially cause harm to either workers or those who are accessing the site, whether it be pedestrians, drivers, or alike. So it's how we set things out, how we get our message across to those who are going to enter our site to ensure that they get through safely, and we continue to protect our workers. We certainly have challenges in the worksite safety traffic management space. How can we ensure roadwork sites are appropriately set up and managed to provide a safe and predictable environment for all road users? And this gets back to this parking scenario. What is the predictable? What is the safe way that we need to get that message across? And the second challenge is, how do we encourage drivers to slow down through our roadwork sites? There's a lot of work going on out in our roads at the moment, and even through these certainly difficult COVID times, we were able to continue to improve our road network. But now that we're getting people back to work, back to offices, we're getting that increased volumes back on the road, the increased risk to our workers. There was one recently in Geelong where, and we're not fully sure of the circumstances, but we had a traffic controller. They extended their traffic bat, stopped bat out into the line of the driver. So, a stop bat handle is about 1.8 meters. The traffic controller had that fully extended out, and for whatever reason, well, I think we know the reason. We believe that the driver was on their phone, and they actually collected the bat. I think they realized the mistake they made, and instead of owning up and fessing up and pulling up, because it is an accident, they sped off out of the scene. So hopefully we've got some video footage of that incident, and we can probably push the law to where it should be in that instance. So we've got to continually to protect our people out on the road, and our traffic controllers are one of the frontline workers that are in that high risk area. So it's really important. We look at other ways. Can we use boom barriers? Can we use traffic signals, portable traffic signals that are still controlled by a traffic controller, so you can control traffic flows. It's not time based. You can get a build up of vehicles at one end, and the other end is based on the traffic movement. So have traffic controllers controlling those portable traffic signals, those portable boom barriers. So you're getting that traffic controller off the road, but you've still got that intimate control of the traffic. These are some of the things we should be trying to encourage out on our sites. We need to provide accurate and timely information to our customers at our roadwork sites. That's a difficult one. We can advertise through social media, through other media outlets, through VMS boards and the like. But for people to read a message, understand the message, and take that on board to plan their trips, that's the challenge probably. And the other one is working with our third parties, with the utilities and our developers. Again, recently we had a developer doing some work on one of our sites, and they struck a gas main. It was just probably I'll use the word arrogance of the operator. We had one of our surveillance guys on site saying, you should not be digging that close to a gas main. You should be doing non-invasive type investigation before you put an excavator bucket into it. And he said, I know where it is. Next thing, they're getting showered in dirt. Luckily, it was an offshoot pipe that had a valve on it that was only pressurized by air, because it was a new development. They hadn't actually tapped the gas into that, but the consequences could have been far, far worse if it was a live gas main. So what we're trying to change the way we do things out on our network. We're adapting a national harmonised approach to traffic management. We've got new guidance for the traffic management practice. 1742 Part 3 has been updated. So we now have a 2019 model of that. We have the Austroads temporary guides to traffic management. We're looking at national harmonisation for traffic control and training. We're looking at a pre-qualification scheme across, these are across Austroads, so it's Australia and New Zealand. We continue on with the, trying to improve our technologies, our education, our auditing, our communication, our standards. So we continue on that road of improvement to ensure safety for everybody. And road safety auditing is a really critical part of this. That we have competent people that are able to go onto a site, assess that site for its safety deficiencies, if you like, and to identify that there could be improvements for us to undertake, so we are having a better site that is safer for all. So it's really important that as an auditor, you have that overarching, that you're able to have that independent view and look at the site and say, well, traffic we've got to get from A to B. Are we supplying the safest way to do that? Our workers have undertaken these tasks. Are they being protected enough? These are the questions you need to be asking when you're undertaking a road safety audit. And as I said, it's an important part of us to make sure we continue on to have a safe environment. And
Tony, I'll just remind everybody to pop their questions into the chat as you're going, and we encourage that conversation. And Tony, you've got just under half an hour, and I notice there's a few more slides in today's presentation, so just reminding you of the time.
Yeah. How long have I got left? Sorry, Ken.
Oh, just under half an hour.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. No, I think I'll. Yeah, we'll. I should have it watching because you're right. I do get caught up in this this topic, and yeah, no, I like to try and pass that message across of the importance of this actual road safety auditor's role. So
absolutely, you're passionate about
it. So yeah, this is probably a very well. It's a situation we come across far too often, the mismanagement of regulatory reduction of speed at our work sites. This was a power core job near Geelong. And as you can see, they had the 40 up, but they also didn't cover the 100 up. And I pulled up to the site and I said to the guys, look, it's incorrectly signed. And you're putting your workers at danger because people will probably be more inclined to do the 100 than 40. And the power core guy said, well, it's not our site. It's being managed by an ex-traffic company. And I said, no, you own the site. You're responsible for the site. They're only engaged to do to help you do your job. You need to make sure they're doing their part as well. And he was sort of taken aback on that because he felt because he'd engaged the traffic management company, then that responsibility was no longer theirs. But it's the principal, it's the principal contractor or the owner of the site. You might engage subcontractors, but you are responsible for the safety of the way it's being managed by your subcontractors. So yeah, you just can't pass that over when you engage a subcontractor. And I had my granddaughter, it was interesting, I had my granddaughter at work there one day and she goes, what can I do? And I said, well, here, this is some of my training material. I said, yeah, draw yourself some roads and what. So this is what she came up with. But what really surprised me was, she was 7, I think, at the time. She knew to put the regulatory speed signs on both sides. I didn't tell her that, but this is the observation of children. This is our future drivers. We've got to continually train these future drivers so that we are having them in a safe environment. We're providing them with the safe tools, safer cars, safer driving environments, these safer roads and the like. But, I was really impressed by her understanding of even the road environment at that very young age. So this is what we need to encourage, get the message out in schools as well as our learner drivers. So we're not teaching them bad habits into the future. This was Mr. Andrews has been in power in Victoria for a while now, but they're talking about, and it's still relevant today, that when the tool goes down, the speed limits go back up. What that enforcing was that we need to make sure we have a speed environment that is safe for our workers. It's a priority that we must ensure that at the start of the day, we go home in the same condition we came to work in. That's our OHS Act obligation. So we must make sure that happens. So it's an important part that we have a speed environment, we protect the workers. When our workers go home or there's no workers left on site, we put speed management to a speed that is relevant to the conditions of the road. If you've got loose, large, sort of aggregate that there's potential for cars to skid off and lose control, we leave it at a speed that they need to be able to manage that. But if we've got a reasonably smooth surface, a reasonably tight surface, and there's no real hazards about, let's put it back up to 60 or 80. So we do give drivers that confidence of the site. But when there's workers about and the clearance to the traffic is limited, then we need to make sure we have that speed correct to ensure the safety of the workers. In Victoria, we still have our code of practice. out of the Road Management Act. It's our 2010 model. We're currently looking at the new, I'll just move to that, to the Austroads guides, but there's still a few little differences in the Austroads guides that, perhaps we see that don't quite meet the standard we were like, and excavations is one of those. There is a height difference that we allow an excavation to be not to have barriers. So there is a difference in that. So we probably need to work through that at the moment. But this is where we hope to move to. That we'll move to these new Austroads guides. Each state will probably have their own maybe guidance material. South Australia, it's built into their legislation about the 25k an hour. There's just small differences that each state have that, yes, they'll probably have to have their own guidance material, but most states are happy to get this national approach on our guidance material. So, and we also have the Australian standard. I've probably gone into the technical side of things for a bit long, but we need to look at what an audit is. We need to make sure an audit is a formal examination of a future road or traffic project or an existing road in which, and this is the important part, that it's independent and qualified, that the team reports on a project's crash potential and safety performance. The road safety audit process concerns the safety of all road users. And it's really important that, out of that, we have that independent, qualified, and it looks at the safety aspects of the actual site for all the road users as well. We could look at doing a road safety audit at the traffic management plan, just a desktop. You can look at the road safety at the work zone and the operation of the plan itself. But things to consider. Sorry, I'll just go back there. So you can do it a desktop. You can do one out when very early when the site has been set up, or if there's been a major change. I think it's important that if you're on a major job and there's been a major change in the way you're managing the traffic, to get another team in just to check that the safety component hasn't been compromised. And certainly, things to look at, certainly your signs, your marking, your temporary crash barriers, your lighting, your pedestrian connectivity, your driver appreciation for the correct path, and all of those issues that you need to be looking at to make sure that site is being signed and set up to ensure those things happen for the safety of everybody. It's interesting that it's about timing. This is Geelong on probably around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm just wondering, if people in the chat can tell me what would be some of the ways we could increase the safety for the workers and the travelling public if we wanted to do work on that road. Say we wanted to do an asphalt patch. What are some of the things we could look at to ensure the safety of workers?
All right, pop that into the chat if you've got any ideas there. If you've got to do some works on the road there, what things could be done to improve the safety of workers? So, right, we've got night works, VMS boards, completely close the lane, barriers, work outside peak times, advanced warning through different VMS boards prior to the works, crash attenuators. Lots of ideas there. Of lots of people wanting to avoid these peak times. There's probably one that I would have liked to have in there as well, Ken. But and certainly people have talked about looking at the hierarchy of control, and we all understand our hierarchy of control needs. Under the OHS Act, and elimination. People talked about closing lanes and whatnot. We should be also looking at detours. That's probably our first. Can we actually eliminate the traffic from the site? In this case, probably not. This is the major road through Geelong. The local road network probably couldn't handle that quantity of traffic. But it was really good that people were looking out of peak hour. Yes, certainly. Depending on the time it would take to do the job. Night works.
there are some issues with night works, residential areas, but, machinery is coming a lot better in the way it's muffled to reduce those noises. Lighting can be directed better to the site rather than, just dispersing it. It's probably a softer light. We're using those tower lights now rather than, those spotlight types. So yeah, our night works are certainly improving as well, because, that's probably a better option. The only one we've got to consider is, those who probably have too much of some sort of intake into their system, whether it be drugs or alcohol. That seems to be an issue that night workers experience. But, it probably overall, if we can do that separation, have good systems in place to ensure that, the workers are protected, then hopefully that minimises the risk of those drivers who choose to operate outside their body capacity for drugs and alcohol. So then this is what we should be trying to achieve, is to work above the line. While this is, part of our construction compliance, it is questions that I would be asking at a road safety audit. What have you done to eliminate the hazard? What have you put in place to, try and substitute or physically isolate? What are the safety aspects you've done? Have you done a risk assessment? Can I look at the documentation you've undertaken? It's just not a sheet that's been photocopied 15, 20 times, and this is our risk assessment for every job. Every site is different. Every site has its own challenges, and every site deserves a risk assessment of its own. So, these are the questions you can ask at a road safety audit. Where's your traffic management plan? Do you have approval to work here? Have you got the consent from the road authority? Have you got consent to actually use the major traffic control items? Have you, if you had to take down a give way sign, what have you put up in place of that give way sign? Or have you relocated that give way sign to ensure that the give way situation is still in place? If not, what traffic control items, have you got a traffic controller there to make sure that the traffic does give way? Unfortunately, that was a fatality many years ago where a contractor, they did remove a give way sign, they didn't put it back up, and an accident happened at the site, and unfortunately there was a fatality. And the coroner was very strong in the way that it was badly managed, that we took away a major traffic control item and it was not replaced at a suitable location that gave drivers the appreciation of the actual site. So, it's, as auditors, we need to be very mindful of what the conditions of the road should be or could be or can be to ensure that the safety of those using the site are getting through there safely without those conflicts of signage not being in a correct location and the like. And working below the line, certainly the least safest is just a set of signs. Unfortunately, we far too often go to, well, we need to put out 40k an hour and we may have to have traffic control in place. We haven't looked at the other ways that we could. Can we actually put a detour in place? Can we use crash attenuators? And I was really pleased that some of the answers there were talked about the crash attenuators, that the protection of the site. There's a few concerns that the crash attenuator may be creating another hazard in itself. I think time will tell whether that maybe practice will change in some way, that you're actually putting a physical barrier up that potentially could create, for the operator of the barrier, for the person that may hit it. But, some of the incidents that I've been involved with looking at the use of the attenuators, it certainly has saved people's lives. People have knocked off shifts and they travel that same road every day. They're in a different zone because they're tired from their work, and we had one person that just, they reckon it was probably 100k an hour. They hit the crash attenuator and everybody walked away, a little bit shaken. But the consequences of someone driving into a work site with workers could have been far different. So they certainly do. They do work. Why do we do all this? As I said, we're protecting the workers and the road users. We've got to make sure we have planning. We've got to make sure we have the correct risk assessment, hazard assessments undertaken, and we do select our devices, whether they're detour, implementing detours or closing off lanes, make sure we have that all set up correctly. We do that by doing surveillance and audit and getting that driver attitude, awareness and behaviour. We've got to make sure we get our side of it right as working in the construction area to make sure that if people see a worker symbolic, I think it'd be a pretty good idea that they see workers. If they see the road work ahead sign, having to see roadworks. And far too often, the no lines sign is left up after the line markers have been through. It's frustrating that that type of signing is left up after the site has been completed. So it's small things like that that really makes it difficult for the drivers to have an appreciation of the safety we're trying to create for our workers.
Now, Tony, a couple of comments have come in and a question and a couple of questions. So Dave's made a couple of good comments here. He's got a lot of experience in this area. One's that councils don't tend to like and approve the road closures, which I think is maybe just a frustration there that he's put down, and also comments on the use of truck-mounted attenuators in some of these situations. Any comments on either of those?
Certainly the local road one, Ken, I can appreciate that because they're designed to carry a certain volume of traffic and they're not designed probably to take heavy vehicles and the like. So if we're detouring down local roads, I wouldn't support that at all, especially on our main road network. But there was a case in Geelong where they had about a 5k section they needed to upgrade. They closed that road. They let the locals have access to it. They do it detoured via the main road network, and they were able to complete that work probably in 2/3 of the time that it would have normally taken under traffic. So one, the disruption is less. Two, the workers can just get on with their work. Yes, there might have been a 10-minute detour for the traffic, but the outcome for everybody was a lot cleaner and a lot safer. So it's really making sure we use the available network to us to handle the volume of traffic that we need to detour. Truck attenuators, what was the question there? Sorry, Ken.
Well, it was more a comment on the use of those in some of these scenarios. Dave's sort of supporting that.
Look, from my experience, yes, certainly. As I said, I think there is some concern, and maybe it's around the age of them and the type. That we're certainly improving the actual attenuators themselves, the way they're mounted. The trailer type, they certainly, I think they've got a limited use. The operator of the attenuator too, they've got to make sure that they're perfectly strapped into their harness and that that they have their safe systems as well. So, and as I also mentioned, it can be seen that you're creating another hazard, but I think you're the protection of the workers and people that have struck them at high speed and they walk away is testament that they are an effective tool. So, I do support them until something better comes along. Yes, there are some risks involved, but not having them there, I think, is a greater risk in certain situations.
Good. Okay, thank you. And Dave's made some clarification there. Trailer TMAs, test level 2 rated. But there's a question that's come in from Jay, which is asking the question about 40 km/h. Is that considered safe enough speed for work sites? And what's the practice in other countries and other jurisdictions?
That is a really great question. If you talk to, and Ken, you might actually be able to maybe articulate this better than I can. if a worker or a person gets struck at 40k an hour, the damage to that person is going to be broken bones and probably hospitalisation and possibly, am I right in saying this, possibly death? Is that right?
Yeah. There's quite a likelihood of death at a 40 kilometre per hour, like the speed of collision. Yes.
Yes. So while it's the management of our sites at 40k an hour, in Victoria, it was really tight that was probably it. But certainly in the code and the Australian standard, you can have that less if you believe that the risk to the workers is higher. There was an incident down the other side of Melbourne where they were working in a gully on a bridge and the approach was downhill, and they had that site reduced down to 20 kilometres an hour because the workers had no escape whatsoever. So that was put down at 20k an hour. So yes, 40 is not the ideal, but it is a lot safer than what if it was at 60 or 80. The other thing to remember is to not only have it at 40, but make sure that you have a clearance that you can achieve. It's getting that clearance between the traffic and the workers is an important part of that process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And slightly different it's different in South Australia. They like a 25.
Sorry, I forgot the second half. So South Australia have built it into their legislation that if there's a worker on the road, you have to pass them at 25k an hour.
Yeah, that's right. And but I think it's a good point there, Tony, that you have the ability to go lower than that 40 if warranted. And as an auditor, if you find you're looking at those situations where you feel that it's a danger still exists, even at the 40, the reduced 40, you may recommend going lower.
And the other side of that too, Ken, is compliance. If we don't have devices in place that encourages drivers to drive at that slower speed, you won't get compliance either. If we have that 40k an hour over too far a distance, drivers will not see any workers and they will speed up. We've got to make sure we're confining our work site to where the workers are at that reduced speed. If there's no workers, raise the speed up again. Put in chicanes, put in a line of bollards that you feel that confined space, and drivers are forced to slow down because of feeling that narrowing of the lane widths. So there are ways to help enforce that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, Tony, you've only got about 5 or 6 minutes to go.
Righto, Ken, I'll just very quickly go through a couple. We're trying to communicate with the road users, and we can't get out there with the megaphones and speakers and the like. So we've got to make sure we are communicating. We have that adequate advance warning we advise the people that we've got works coming up. We advise of those changes in the road service or driving conditions. We advise that the reasons to slow down. We advise that there's going to be people or machinery working in the area. We gave adequate instructions to guide the road users safely through, around or past a work site. And importantly, when we get to the end of the job, that if we've had major traffic control items in place, such as speed reductions, that we put that speed back up to the normal road speed. That's another bugbear of mine, that we see sites slowed down to 40. They don't have the return speed. So you've really got to wait till the next town before you speed up. Of course you don't, but it's, it makes life very difficult for the road users, and we need to make sure we continually get it right. Look, I will sort of go through a little bit quicker here, Ken, if there are any more questions. But, we just, if we can break it down, that we look at that advance warning area, the transition area, we have a bit of a clearance area for the workers, we have a adjacent clearance area for the workers, and then we have the termination area. If you break it down to those work areas, or those areas, I should say, we think about the signs that we have in the advance. We can have VMS boards. We can have our roadwork ahead. We can have signing that is going to tell the driver what they can expect, if there's going to be loose gravel or loose material and the like. We have that area where that we need to, I must have another meeting. I've just got a text message, sorry. We must have another in the transition area, that we have that guidance material, guidance devices, such as your bollards and cones and the like, the chevrons. You know, especially at night time, we must make sure that that transition area is really well defined. We have that area that is clear for workers, that, you know, you've got that little bit of a buffer if someone happens to enter into the work site incorrectly, that you have that bit of a area that is clear for, you know, that person to pull up. And of course, we have our work area. Is it protected enough? Are we protecting our workers in that area enough, you know, through our devices, our barriers, our whatever it might be, to make sure we are protecting the workers, and we're also ensuring that the drivers don't enter into that work area. And when it's all done and dusted, we get up the end roadworks. We have the prevailing speeds put up. You know, that we, and even, you know, some people don't like the passive signing, but, you know, we're finding that some of that passive signing of, you know, please slow down, our mum or dad works here, or thank you for taking, you know, thank you for driving safely through our work site. It can, I think it does have some effect in the way that, you know, drivers may approach our sites at times, but we shouldn't just rely on signing. Ken, I might just, you know, I'm happy to, you know, continue on, but just a one quick question to the group. Apart from shape, what are what's the difference in those two stop signs? You know, maybe there's a chocolate here for someone who can get it straight up.
All right, we'll wait for those to come in. First person to put that.
Was there any other questions that came through at all?
One's come through from Alex. I'm not quite sure I understand it. I'm going to need a bit more clarification. It says, hi, Tony. Have you seen temporary traffic management arrangements be part of a design package? I'm not sure I quite follow that.
Maybe the road design that they could be talking about, but how are we going to manage? And that's a really good question, Ken, if I'm understanding it correctly. And I haven't. But I think, you know, moving forward, we're talking about in our tendering processes, these non-priced attributes, and safety is got to be built into that. You know, we're having too many probably incidents where safety is being compromised. But if a tenderer can demonstrate the safety component within their tendering process, then, you know, that should be rewarded in some way. And I really like the idea that, you know, in a design of a particular, if it's a roundabout, how are we going to manage the traffic through that construction staging process? And we probably do see it, but you know, I reckon that's probably a really good thought. And I honestly haven't seen that. We certainly get the designs and then build our traffic management around that design. But considering you know, the worker safety through that design process, I like it.
Yeah, we might have to close things out there, but we did get quite a few comments come in. Some ones which I suppose technically are correct. One's got a black border and the other's got a white border, but that's not quite where you were aiming at.
No.
Then we've got some people explaining that one's a traffic control sign and one's more a permanent sign. But then we get into a couple, I think, which is a little bit more what you're looking for. So octagon signs means you can proceed after stopping and giving way. Round sign means stay stopped until the sign is not displayed, which I think is the one you were looking for.
Yep. So yes, it's that one's a handheld. The other one is seen at an intersection. So the octagon one is where the driver makes a decision. They must stop, but if it's clear to go, they can proceed. If you're faced with the round one, you must stop and stay stopped until it's no longer displayed. So yeah, that's the important difference, and that's why we use round ones at roadworks, and of course you also see them at children's crossing points or pedestrian crossing points for person controlled.
Yeah.
Leave it there, Ken. If there's any other burning questions or that people want to ask.
Yeah, no, there's none at the moment, but we've got your contact details there. And as I said, Tony's prepared a lot of pre-recorded material for you, because I know some of you are very passionate about this, as just like Tony, and you'll be able to watch that in your own time. So certainly if you're somebody who works a lot in this space, I really encourage you to have a look at those. And certainly for everybody else, if you're starting to get into that sort of stuff, there's a lot of detail there. Thank you so much there, Tony. Really appreciate your time. And I'm going to just cover off a few more things before we go. But thank you very much. Have a great weekend, Tony.
Sorry, Ken, because I was going to touch on the checklist, but if you want to do that one as well, that'd be appreciated. I think I got caught up in the moment of this. I've been stuck inside too much, and I need to vent these issues out. So I thank everybody for their time, and hopefully I got the message across in that short period. But I do encourage people to look at the full video and just to try and round it all off.
And I will just briefly touch on the checklist now, and including the worksite one as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully I've got this all working this time. So that should be working there. And I'm going to pop that up. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my screen there. And sorry, questions just come in. Can we get a copy of the slides from Tony? Tony's slides are in Moodle, so they're just sitting outside. They're one of the ones that you can click and download those slides, and then the video's in there as well, and so there'll be plenty there for you. Tony mentioned the checklists, and I just want to remind you that there are these checklists in the back of the Austroads guide, part 6A, and you'll see there that there's the feasibility, preliminary design, detailed design, pre-opening, roadworks, and existing roads. So you've got checklists that are these documents here, and you can see some of them are sort of 15, 20 pages long worth of questions that you might want to think about for a road safety audit. So you've got those, and you really will be utilizing those as you go about doing audits. The thing is, though, that you need to remember is that these are just thought starters. That doesn't necessarily cover everything that there is. So stand back, have a look broadly at the project, but do use those to guide your thinking as well. There will be things that may not appear in your audit. That in the checklist that you would want to put in your audit. The other thing to note is that you do not submit your checklist with your audit report. Okay, so they're just there to guide your thinking. You only report on the things that you believe are issues. And you'll go through these and you'll just have so many not applicables, because you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And that's because these checklists are trying to cover every road environment out there. So we just, you'll have a lot of not applicables, but what that's done is it's forced you to think about that issue and is it applicable to the site? But then you really do need to stand back and look holistically at it. And that doesn't matter if it's a work site audit, a feasibility audit, an existing condition, you need to holistically look at the scheme. So what I want to do now is just give you the introduction to the little exercise you're going to do. But please put your questions in to the chat as I'm going through this. But after the end of this session, you've got your usual quiz, which you're going to do on the content that was covered today. And then you've got another assignment, which is based in Moodle and similar format to the quiz, but there's a little bit more to it. what we're going to start you doing is thinking about how to write up these sorts of audits. So the finding, the level of risk, the safe system energy, the recommendation, and the categorization of the recommendation. Because this is the meat of a road safety audit. And this is the table that you'll be filling out when you go to do your full audit with issues that you find and risks that you believe the risk rating would be. So what we've done is we've given you a design. Okay, so this is proposed works for your exercise. And the proposal is to add a Copenhagen-style bike lane onto Wellington Street in Collingwood, for those who know the area. If you don't know the area, don't worry, that's fine as well. So this is Victoria Parade here, which is a dual carriageway. So there's this one that goes eastbound. So actually north is to your right, to the right of screen there. One carriageway this way, one carriageway this way, quite a wide median there, and a light rail, a tram line through the middle. But what the project is to take the parking from curbside and push it out and provide the bike lane on the edge. And then do some changes in lane configuration accordingly. So you can see there that there's some changes to the lanes, the bike lane, some new bike marking. What you'll see there is the blue is the new, the grey wash underneath is the existing. So some pictures of the site here. So you could look back at these if you want. This is looking up Victoria Parade there. This is the general area, but here's some aerial imagery of how it's existing. So you'll see that the cars have parking on the curbside. Well, we're bringing them out, and then bikes are now going to go along the curb here. And there's changes to the lane configuration. From a street view perspective, you can see there the parking was here. It's coming out. A concrete separator will go in, and you go through there. Oh, there's a sneaky Wally. I'll help you out there. There you go. You can see the tram or the light rail going through the middle of this wide median. You got your lanes coming through in the existing conditions. And you're going to look at the design and answer the questions. So that's what they're trying to build, basically. Some curb separators, put the bikes separated away from where the parked cars are, so that car's parked. That's one side of the road. The other's got a more narrow separator. So I'm going to stop that, and I'm just going to open up Moodle and share that screen. So what you'll do is you'll do your usual quiz, but then you get this, which is your assignment. And so you can review the design, which there's a link to the design there, but it's also provided on your memory stick in Schoology, but you can have a look at it there. And then you're going to sort of complete the finding. Now, we've pre-written some findings for you, but you're still going to need to get your head around all of this. But what I want you to note is how it's written up and the like. And you've basically on this one got to drop the correct wording in to complete the full finding. You've got to then risk rate it, but we've given you some information that the crash will occur occasionally and the outcome will be serious. It's predicted that it is. So then you'll have to work out what the corresponding risk rating is, within or above safe system tolerable levels, and then primary supporting or non-safe system for a predefined recommendation that's in there. Then there are 3 findings and corresponding questions. They're slightly different on all of them. This is your first step into starting to see all of the bits that need to come together to produce an audit report. And so we want you to have a bit of a play around with that. Remember, you get 3 attempts at this. So don't get too concerned if your first one's not as good as you'd like it to be. You've got 2 more after that. And if you're really struggling, of course, we want you to get in contact and we'll talk you through this and make sure that you get up to that benchmark that we're setting. A couple of other quick administrative things from me. So Kathy's put through an apology that there was an issue with one of the questions in the quiz just gone, which was, I think, around the requirement for nighttime inspections as part of audit report auditing, which is generally done in most audits. So I think that was incorrectly put into the system. So they will review those and rectify the any that got through. So apologies for that. You need to do your quiz and the little assignment here, and we want you to get that done before Tuesday, because we will be giving you your full audit assignment. And what we want you to have done is how to go at this, to get your head around how to risk rate, how to put safe system energy in, how to write up a finding, because then you're going to go out, identify the issues yourself and write them up. So any final questions for me before we close out today's session? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. We've covered a lot. Questions come in, how many wombats? I'm not even sure myself. I'd have to have a look in the system. Remember, you do get a little bit of tolerance either side on your wallies, so don't get too concerned. There were a few in there. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Reach out if you're stuck on your research project, but just get something down on paper, a fact sheet. Just record yourself if you want, talking about the issue, and pop that in. And I'm sure you'll do very well on that. Have a wonderful weekend, and congratulations to those who got prizes, and those who didn't get prizes. Perhaps get in early for next session and answer the trivia, and you could be a prize winner as well. Have a good weekend.